What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be telling the story of catching my personal best largemouth bass. So for a little bit of context, my personal best largemouth bass as it stands sits at 10 pounds and 2 ounces. I caught this fish October 8th in 2017, and I will never forget that day because catching this fish is one of the greatest memories literally of my entire life. So I caught this big old largemouth in a pond in Alabama. I have family that lives down in Alabama, and my grandparents happen to have this small pond on their property. And before like 2016, I pretty much hated fishing, so I had never really stepped foot in this pond in any serious way. So I had never fished it, so it was pretty much untouched waters when it comes to me. But as soon as our family fishing trip up to Canada for smallmouth kind of ignited my passion for fishing, as soon as we went back down to Alabama, I was on that pond basically 24/7, hours and hours at a time. This is the pond where I learned how to fish a Texas rig, how to tie knots, how to catch fish on a topwater, a frog, a horny toad, you name it. This is where I learned how to catch fish. My grandfather was kind of my mentor. I've got some excellent memories of him and I going down on the super old, probably 60-year-old John boat that is kind of debatable regarding its floating and its steering, but it's good enough. And this is the pond where I really cut my teeth in bass fishing and tried to figure out, is this something that I want to do for the rest of my life? And the answer was, yes. So in 2017, we went down there on a trip to visit our family, and I had to fish, I had to wet a line, so I take my rods down there and quite literally have been combing every inch of this this pond all week throughout the entire trip. Probably spent a little too much time down there at the pond, but that's okay. But this pond at the time was not managed super well, and when I say not managed well, I mean it was overgrown. There was trees that had fallen into the lake, there was grass that grew out into the pond, which in all actuality makes the fishing more interesting because there's more diversity and cover, there's more things to flip. You got grass growing from the hillside down into the pond, giving submerged grass. You've got trees that have fallen in there making some super sick laydowns, and you got a rock slide too. So I mean, this pond had all types of cover, so it made the perfect pond for learning how to bass fish. The only issue with this pond was that there's no big fish in it. Now, we're going to get to a 10-pounder here in a second, so don't get too mad at me just yet. But I joke you not, excluding the 10-pounder, which is a huge exclusion, I had never caught a fish and have never caught a fish over probably 2.5 pounds. And I'll include the second biggest fish that I've ever caught at this pond. I'll include a picture here. So if you caught a fish like over 1.5 pounds, that was a rarity, to be honest with you. Like, there was no big fish in this pond. It was a great pattern pond. You could catch them on horny toads all day long, and that was super fun, but you weren't going to get any size. And that's okay. It was still a great time, great learning experience, but man, I wanted to catch a big fish. I was like, there just ain't any big fish in here. It just doesn't have the right population, doesn't have enough bait fish, but I'm going to keep fishing it because I love to fish. That all changed on October 8th, 2017. So my grandfather and I wanted to go down and clear some limbs. What we were trying to do is add a little bit more bank access for anybody that wanted to go down to the pond and fish from the bank, because it was kind of a commitment to get out in the boat because you had to hand crank that joker in and crank it back out. It was kind of difficult, pretty heavy and kind of cumbersome, especially for a person 16 years old my age. I wasn't super strong at that time, so he wanted me to be able to fish from the bank. So we take our chainsaws and we take some hand saws and axes and all that crap down there just to kind of clear out some limbs to make it easier to fish from the bank. So it's October, but all know Alabama down south, it gets pretty dang hot. So we take a quick break. My grandfather is an older man, so he needs to take his rest and get a drink of water, and I do too. So we finished cutting down some limbs, kind of actually cleared out a lane, which is where I was able to make the cast to catch my 10-pounder, so the work came to fruition. But we'd taken a little break, and I actually picked up my fishing rod, and I'll tell you the specifications of the fishing gear here in a moment, and just stepped into the back of the boat, right next to where the plug is towards the back of the boat, and was just standing in the base of the boat while it was on land. So here's what I was throwing. I was throwing a 7-foot medium Bass Pro spinning rod. I think just a fast action, your pretty typical spinning rod setup. I was throwing some type of Daiwa reel, and it was kind of one of the lower level ones, so basically no drag system whatsoever. It was a terrible drag system, and I didn't have the reverse on, so if I were to have gotten a bite, the fish wouldn't have any line. Like, I wasn't going to be able to fight it properly. I know I was throwing some type of monofilament line. I think my father had spooled them up with like 10-pound monofilament, which I love using monofilament, but I prefer braid to fluorocarbon leader now, but at the time that wasn't even a thought in my mind. So 10-pound probably Stren monofilament on the reel, And then I was throwing at like a 1/4 ounce weight, and granted this is like an 8-foot deep pond, so a 1/4 ounce is a little excessive, with like a 3/0 hook and a 5-inch wave worm tiki stick, which is kind of an old school Senko. Has a super unique smell. It kind of smells like Guggen baits. I'm a little sus of Guggen. I'm just playing. I like my Guggen baits, but it kind of reminds me of the smell of Guggen baits, the tiki products. So I bombed that joker out there. And I specifically remember flipping my bail over and like letting it free fall straight down as if I was fishing a vertical drop in like 30 feet of water. It's like, oh yeah, this is what the professionals do right here. When in fact it was 8 feet deep, and it probably hit the bottom with a 1/4 ounce of weight within 2 seconds of it hitting the surface of the water. But hey, this is all for the tour. And I start working it back, and I'm obviously holding it with my left hand. I'm gonna try to tell the story without using my right hand, because I know at the time I was using my left hand. Working it back, jigging it back across the bottom, and like I said, the lake is overgrown, so you got this big tapering grass mat that probably goes out 10 or 15 yards into the pond. So I bring it right to the edge of that grass mat. I see like a giant wake, like a big wake. I was like, well, it was probably a real rat bass jumped up and probably got some type of spider or bug or something off the surface. But it did draw my attention to the spot, I'll tell you that much. So I make sure to try to angle my worm over towards the wake, just thinking, okay, I might catch this little tiny fish. And then I let it sit there for a really long duration of time. I used to have this habit with my plastics of throwing them out there and just like letting them sit, which at times is super beneficial. But I used to let them sit for like a minute. And I did this, and I let the bait sit on the bottom in front of this grass line under this wake for like a minute, and I feel the most subtle tick ever. Like, in the comparison to all the bass bites I've ever gotten from quality fish, this was probably the softest bite, like just the most subtle tick. So I'm like, okay, I've got another rat on, another 1-pounder, pretty standard size for this pond. That's exciting. Set the hook on it, hit him pretty hard, because I still hit fish hard back then as I do now. And it doesn't really move very much. The best way I can kind of describe the way this bass fought was like if you put a Walmart bag in the water and filled it with water and then try to tug it while you're swimming, like the drag of the water in the bag like is like dead weight basically. So I'm like, what's going on here? Have I got some type of different fish, or do I have something wrapped in grass, or do you even have a fish? Yeah, I had a fish on. This joker tries to jump, like I crap you not, like daggum Shamu jumping out of the water. So as soon as we see this fish break the surface, me and my grandfather both freak out. I start shaking. At this time I barely know how to fight big fish. Nevertheless, a fish of that caliber, I had never seen a fish near that size in my entire life. And I start horsing, like, oh man, I gotta get this thing in here as fast as possible. My grandfather's like, no, let it do its thing. Let it do its thing. And granted, I would have let it do its thing if my reel had any drag system whatsoever, but it didn't. So I'm just basically fighting this fish and pausing when it runs and then fighting some more. It probably takes 2 or 3 minutes to get it in. And like I said, this fish never did fight super hard, but it was just heavy. Obviously, it was 10 pounds, super heavy. And we get it close to the bank, and it gets bogged up in all that grass that I mentioned earlier. And I can't get it. I'm like, oh crap, I'm gonna lose this fish, man. I bet you I didn't get a good hook in it. Ended up, had an excellent hook in it, but that's besides the point. My grandfather walks into the water, sprints into the water, reaches down, grabs that joker's mouth with one hand and like scoops it up under its like belly with his other hand, and then sprints back onto the shore and brings me a 10-pounder. And man, the thing was hooked good. I couldn't get it undone, so he unhooked it for me. He basically did all the work. I just hooked the fish and fought it. But he got it unhooked, handed it to me, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I caught a 10-pounder. I caught a 10-pounder. I caught a 10-pounder. And you guys know how it generally goes. You go out fishing, you don't expect to catch big fish, so you don't bring a scale, and then you catch a giant and you don't have a scale. This is one of the few times in my entire fishing career where I had a scale and caught a big fish. And this scale right here, this rinky-dinky Eagle Claw fishing scale, went down to 10-2 that day. Just unbelievable. There's no telling how old the scale is. It comes with a tape measure, which I don't think we measured it, which we should have, but I was so freaking out and so excited I just couldn't pay any attention to anything else. And then I was like, my very next thought was, okay, we have to get a photograph of this fish. It must be documented. No one's going to believe that I caught it. And I have an Android phone, and I don't think my grandfather at the time had ever used an Android camera or an Android phone camera. So I had to literally walk him through while holding this behemoth of a fish of how to take a picture of me so we can get this thing documented. And I was like, oh, I hope he can take a good picture. I hope he can take a good picture. Took an unbelievably great photo. One of the best photos I've ever seen taken of me with a fish, like literally, objectively, he took a great photo. And he totally encapsulated the memory of that day. You know, this is easily one of the best memories I've ever had with my grandfather, and just one of my best all-around memories in general. You know, it's just something that I'll cherish forever. You know, fishing moments like that just burn into your memory in a positive way, and they just mean a lot. And it was so awesome that I got to spend it with my grandfather too. But after we get the pictures, get that thing weighed, we've had it out of the water for way too long. You know, I'm just freaking out, man. I'm still shaking. I cannot believe what just happened. My grandfather takes the fish, gets back in the water, and starts reviving it to ensure that it's got oxygen in its gills so we can release it. And probably 6 or 7 minutes following, you know, him dipping it in the water, trying to get it to swim off, it swims off. And that's the end of the story. The end of the fish is gone. I've caught and released a 10-pound bass. So guys, that wraps up the story. You know, catching your personal best, especially a double-digit bass, is something that doesn't get to happen to everybody. So I feel incredibly blessed and fortunate to have stumbled across a fish of that caliber. So many things have to go right in order for a fish to get that big. And if you look at the photograph that I'm going to include of the fish, you'll notice that it kind of has a skinny belly that tapers up towards the tail. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that this fish had the potential to be a teener. Like, I'm dead serious. This was caught in October, so late post-spawn. I mean, I wouldn't even call it post-spawn. It's just like its average weight because it's so far from the spawn. What I'm trying to say is during the spawn, we're looking at a potential 13-pounder. You know, you add 2.5 to 3 pounds of this fish, it's a teener, and fill it with eggs, you know, a little more food, a better fed pond. We're looking at a teener caliber fish, and that just goes to show how monstrous this fish's frame was. To be 10 pounds and not exactly skinny, but to be 10 pounds and not fat is just unreal, and I feel so blessed to have caught this fish. And make sure to go down to the comment section and let me know what your personal best is and give me a little synopsis as to how you caught it. Make sure to hit that like button and hit that subscribe button. And as always, guys, I want to thank you so much for watching. I'll see y'all in the next one.